I always tell authors not to worry about being on time because it's better to get the people in and see the trapped.
To her being not part of the story anymore. So, and it bummed me out because she moved, the apartment she just had and then just gave up was right across the street from a restaurant we've been to a bunch of times. This very local casual place called Frankie and Johnny's. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. You're across the street from Frankie and Johnny's. We can just wander over. You never got there. The whole time she lived there for a year, we never got there. I'm like, I'll go back. I'll probably be back at Frankie and Johnny's and look across the street and know she's not living there. I'm kind of ticked off at because she came in the year Eliza did. She was the first female layperson of Loyola New Orleans. Because it's a Catholic school, but so she was the first, and then she suddenly announced, like at the beginning of this year, that she was leaving to go run Fordham. So she was like, and her dad was a former priest and her uncle was a priest and she grew up on the Loyola campus practically and she was very tied to it. And then she was like, well, I asked myself, I prayed on it and blah, 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 and decided I should be part of the national conversation. It's like you're basically saying we're not part of that conversation. You're kind of insulting us on your way out the door. So Eliza, who, was like, oh, she's amazing, I love her, they all turned on her because they were pissed off that she bailed on the school. One operates differently, and I'm expecting, I expect some stuff that gets done by one publisher, I'm assuming another does it and they don't, and then I find they might do something else that the other one doesn't. It's, so I'm constantly going, especially when it's new, and this is my first book with Berkeley, I'm going, hey, can you do this? No, we don't do that. But we did do this, so it's like, okay.
Is it easier to get a book in a bookstore?
If you're traditional.
No contest.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially something like a Barnes and Noble. They really don't want to know from self-published. And then also there are some publishers where, like there used to be a publisher called Henry, which is now not really working, where they don't have a great return rate. So someone like Anne, she'll order their books because she wants to support the writers because she's so fabulous about supporting us. Bless you, thank you. And then she's either stuck with it. She can only order 2 books because otherwise she's stuck with them, or so there are lots from that on the bookseller's end that they have to be careful of. Now, self-published someone who's self-published will come here and do it on consignment with Anne, so she doesn't get stuck with inventory she can't move.
Exactly. And so every dollar counts. Mm-hmm. And I love helping people who are just starting out and are self-publishing.
And you're so good at it.
Well, where else are they going to do it?
Mm-hmm, exactly.
But I have to mix it with authors like yourselves who come in and draw an audience and have books that people are following and know. So it makes a big difference.
Interested, or no publisher was interested in publishing your work if you're out of the gate the first time there, because there might be a very legitimate reason it's not being published. I have a standalone that's being out on submission now, and it's been turned down like 4 times, and it would be if I cut the part that I like the best, because it goes back and forth a little in time. Someone at Amazon has offered, said, if they cut that and just made it pure suspense, we'll publish it. I'm like, well, no, I don't want to do that. But if push comes to shove and my husband loses his job and we need the money, I'll do it. But for now, and so if I might get to the point where I decide to publish it myself, but that can also hurt you if you get bad numbers when you self-publish, a traditional publisher may look at that and not be interested in you.
That have signed with us from the beginning, which I'm thrilled about. And they come back with each book. We always enjoy them. One or the other always brings goodies. You have homemade chocolate chip cookies back there, and you don't want them to go to waste.
Please, don't dare take them home.
You don't want to take them home. All right. So we're introducing them is ridiculous because you know who they are, but a brand new
Series.
approach, new series.
New genre.
For both of us.
Yes, that's wonderful. From Nancy Cole Silverman, and I love the cover. And you always have great covers with yours.
I'm lucky.
Bayou Book Thief. We all said this morning, oh, it's perfect for book club.
Oh, great.
You know, they were excited this morning. So, ladies, it's all yours.
The Misty Dawn series, which were both cozies. But about 3 years ago, my father passed away, and I was going through some family papers and so forth, and I found my dad's old flight logs. My dad was a Navigator bombardier, aboard a B-24 during the Second World War, and he was stationed out of Bari, Italy. And I'm going through things, and I find his old flight logs. And I also found a diary he had made. His group. They were never frightening stories. I think having daughters, he wanted he came home as many did and went on with his life. For many years, we would chat about, we'd go back to the Air Force Academy because he was shot down, and actually he came back, and the Air Force Academy honored his group because of what they had done. And so one year, about 1989, 1990, my dad called me and he said, you know what, they found my plane. And I go, what? And that was all it took, was they found my plane. Those were the first words out of his mouth, and I knew exactly what he was talking about. And I said, well, how could that be? He says, well, I got a letter from the War Department telling him that a young Hungarian had found his plane, the Iron Curtain had gone down, and he wanted to know, did Dad want to come to Hungary and see the plane and maybe take a tour? Which made sense because people in Hungary at that point were just desperate to get any way to make a living. You know, their economy was in shambles. And so Dad had me correspond with the man. I knew I had a publisher. I had several publishers that reached out and said they wanted this story. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put another page and say, or alternative ending, that this could go on. And the publisher got back to me and she says, it's not a standalone, Nancy. This is the beginning of your new series. So that's my new series. So here with me today are a picture of my dad's crew, who all became alternative people in my book. In Names and Change, not the location though, to protect the innocent. And this is an example of what the B-24, the aircraft that was built here in this country, mass production, mostly by women, that my dad flew in. So if you want to come up and look at it, I'd love to chat with you about it. So that's the story of the genesis of the book. And when I sat down, I thought this is a story that's got to straddle two timelines. It's the timeline of the present day in 1990 and the World War II. And a father asks his daughter if she'll go back to Hungary, and the father is ill, can't make the trip himself. And the daughter, who has lost her job and sitting in Arizona, where I was from, 120 degrees, thinks, so it's not the best time for me to go. And he says, well, what are you going to do?
I had actually written a nice quote for a friend's book who she had her first series coming out with Berkeley, and I had a nice relationship with her editor. And so I'd had an idea for a series that I'm actually not going to go into detail because it's in the back burner because I still think it's a great idea. And I told my agent, I put together a proposal. I said, you know, why don't we run this by Berkeley, because I think they might be interested in working with me. And so he did, and they really liked it. The thing is, they said we have actually we're a little concerned because we have some stuff, you know, some other books that are in this kind of arena. And but they liked, you know, the fact that it involved an historic house and it involved books. And they said, maybe it could be rare books. And I'm like, you know, I don't know much about rare books. And then it hit me, I collect vintage cookbooks. I developed this odd little hobby a number of years ago. We used to have a cottage in Connecticut, on a lake in Connecticut. And my brother and I he loved to go antiquing because he would buy old baseball gloves and refurbish them and sell them on the internet for a lot of money. So we went into a store, and there was this really charming little book with a yellow cover and bright 1950s decor. It was called The Ford Treasury of Famous Eating Places. It was from 1958, and I'm a color person. I really gravitate to color. And so I bought this little book, and inside there were little illustrations, and I love history. So it'd be like, and I knew some of the restaurants, like there was the Silver Mine Tavern in Connecticut. But it was all, and what it turned out, I learned, is that Ford Motor Company would, for a while, put out this cookbook because it encouraged people to do driving trips, to drive, because it was like famous eateries all over the country. So you could get in your Ford and motor to a okay. But I would see them and find them, and this cookbook was so cool because it would have Greta Garbo, but it would also have someone you never heard of, because 1928 was the transition from silence to talkies. So it'd have Vilma Banky's recipe, and of course all the, I know Hollywood, I'm a TV writer, so they were all, I'm sure, provided by the, by the studio publicists. I mean, I doubt John Barrymore had a spaghetti recipe that he was donating to the cookbook, which is in there. Oh, I've got one for you. So they start sending them to me. The oldest is about 1875, but what I really love are from the 20s through the 60s. That's really my sweet spot. So anyway, I said, okay, well, what if it's a vintage? What if my protagonist decides she's going to create a shop that sells vintage cookbooks and then vintage kitchenware? Because when I was a kid, I was afraid of boring people, but this is fun. There was a brief TV game show I would watch with my mom, because she got such a kick out of it, where they would show like people like me, like kids, things from other generations and see if who could figure out what it was. And I'll never forget a kid looking at this like weird thing that was like pointed on one end and it was a can opener from like the 30s. And if you look at old movies, it's the one they use, like the hobos would use. So that image stayed with me. There are women: Ella Brennan, Ruth Fertel, who started Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, and I can tell you a little about that history later if you're interested, and then Leah Chase, who's actually the only one of the three who's an actual chef. And Dookie Chase was her restaurant, and she's the black chef and restaurateur, and her restaurant was also a centerpiece of the civil rights movement. So I started thinking about Ella Brennan because New Orleans is full of characters, and I started reading about her, and her sister Adelaide was like a total New Orleans character. There's this great story where she bought a Rolls Royce from the royal family in Britain, had it shipped over, but it was really unreliable. So when she was traveling the Rolls Royce, she would have a chauffeur in another car traveling behind her. So when the Rolls died, she'd get out and get in the other car. Big drinker, and at one point, Ella got divorced, and she and her kids moved in with, and her daughter, by the way, is still running Commander's Palace, Ella Brennan's daughter, and they moved in with Adelaide, who was married briefly but never had kids, and they were just party animals, and the kids would be like, "Mom, I've got a test in the morning," and they get up and they'd be like at noon, like completely blotto, these women, because they were recovering. So I decided to take one of those gorgeous homes in the Garden District and turn it in, that it was owned by this famous New Orleans restaurateur. And I named her V. Charbonnet. And the name Charbonnet is kind of an homage. Growing up, there was a family in our town. We called them the Scarsdale Kennedys, because it was like this Catholic family that had 9 gorgeous children. And the mother, I was fascinated by them. And the mother was actually, I found out, was from New Orleans. Her maiden name was Charbonnet, and she died young. There was this weird illness, a clotting issue that ran through the women in the family. And so it's kind of an homage to her. Kitchenware, and of course, in addition to other stuff. And then when I was writing it, I decided it would be really fun to include some recipes from some of my cookbook collection. It's also how you cook and what the ingredients are, in 1930 is very different than in 2022, 80 years later, or 90 years later at this point. So I adapt. So there are about 5 recipes in there that are from these cookbooks and that I've adapted, because sometimes like there's a recipe from a cookbook advertorial, that Pet Milk put out in 1939 to advertise their evaporated milk. And it's on this. The recipe is on this card, and it's for coconut patties, but it didn't specify something like, well, do you use unsweetened or sweetened coconut. So I would like play and make a choice. And then I also realized, well, you know what? This is a great basis. If you want to add almond flavoring or another flavoring, you could make it your own. So that is the genesis of my new series, the Vintage Cookbook Mysteries. And
I think it's interesting because one of the things that Ellen does so well is she takes you into the world of New Orleans, because obviously you can see she loves it. She went to school there. She lives and breathes it. Her daughter is there. And when I sat down to write a new series myself, I thought I had been very fortunate, and I had gone to Budapest. And I had toured Budapest, and I had gone up and down the Danube River. Matter of fact, in my 20s, I lived in Europe. And so I thought I kind of know this area, and I wanted to make it come alive for my readers. And I was very pleased that the initial reviews came back very positive about people saying, I felt I was there. Budapest is a city divided by the Danube. Buda is on one side and Pest is on the other. And it goes back centuries. And the architecture is neoclassical, and it's fantastic to study it and look at it and to understand this is a country. The language is like no other. The language in Budapest is not a language that is like the other European. It's not like German. It's not like French. So understanding it is Hungarian is very different, and understanding that the position of the city and what was happening at the end of the war when Hungary had changed sides allowed me to do a lot of research, as well as to go back into the ancient history of Budapest when the original Romans were there and it was a Roman colony. And the mountains where people hid were caves because of the volcanic development of the mountains in that area, that inside were like long arms of volcanic openings and caves, and this is where people hid. And as my protagonist's father's plane was coming limping from Austria, where they had been where their two engines had been knocked out and they couldn't get back over the mountains, the Carpathian Mountains, came in and was going to belly flop, and they had to get out before a belly flop because they would have flattened the plane and killed them all. They realized they didn't know where they were landing. These were young boys, 19, 18 years old. The pilot of the plane that escapes with my protagonist in the book, he didn't even have his driver's license. He did not even have his when the war ended, his father had to take him to get his driver's license. Superman who can fly, kill us all. And it was the beginning of this. And all of this takes place. All this research I was able to kind of gently fold into this daughter's mission to go back and find these two people who her father says they must be alive. They were, the mother would be about my age, but she had a son who's named Adolf, because Adolf was a very popular name in Europe at that time. And so she goes back and she meets these people and finds them, and she goes back into the fortress that was on a mountaintop. And if you go through all of Europe, you can look on mountaintops. There's lots of old Roman fortresses, and below them were wells, because that's where you had to draw you didn't go out to get your water. You dug down into the mountain to get the water and bring it up.
Who was in town working on a movie, so I got a little of my my industry business in there. And they moved back to LA when she was 7, my character Ricky, whose name is Miracle Fleur-de-Lis James Diaz, and she's Miracle because she was premature, and her teenage mother gave birth and disappeared. So that's her adoptive mother named her Miracle, and Fleur-de-Lis is the famous image and flower of New Orleans, and James was and then she married Luis Diaz, who was in town working on a movie. But now my protagonist, she's lost her husband. She was briefly married. She's 28, and she impulsively made a wrong choice and married an actor. So it was fun for me to get some of my own experience in Hollywood, and it was an actor who was a frustrated actor, not doing well, but he found fame on the internet doing stupid stunts. Because my neighborhood in Studio City, we constantly have influencers moving in and out who, I'll be doing a walk, like a power walk for myself, and someone shoots down the hill on a street luge, or someone's filming him, below. So her husband, they were in the process of separating when he passed away doing a stupid stunt.
It started out Tuesday with Ellen, and so now it's Monday with Ellen. So we walk, and a lot of times, I'm thinking, which book are which book are we talking about?
I know.
Because we go back and forth all the time, and we kind of are test characters.
When I came into the mystery community, I was, between jobs in TV, and then I got another job in TV. But there was a women's gym in our, in Studio City. I joined, and I saw her one day because I'd been to a meeting, this organization, Sisters in Crime, I'd never heard of, but I joined. Now I'm very involved and with Mystery Writers of America. And I saw her at the gym. I go, you look familiar. And I knew her from the mystery world. And then somehow we discovered we live blocks from each other.
Yeah.
So we live in the same little hilly neighborhoods in Studio City. It's called the Donnas because it was the last subdivision. It was built in 1960, and it was the last subdivision built in this neighborhood.
And what's really bad is when you're walking by somebody and we're saying, but I just haven't figured out who I'm going to kill.
Yeah. And the neighbors are like...
And they're like, those two are around together.
Yeah.